Hey guys, my name's Brian Stabile. I'm the guy who is Astro Crow, I suppose. There's two other guys, but I'm technically the one who's got the most involvement. I do all the day-to-day. I make most of the games. Up here I've got a list of 4 games on Android and 6 games on iOS. Those are my whole repertoire right now. If you want to check them out, please do so. If you got questions, ask me. I'm willing. Next slide. So, you guys have heard of Indie Game, the movie, I'm guessing. Everyone's aware of that. So you know the story. It's about these indie guys who all struggle, they work really, really hard, and at the end they have a huge payout, right? That's not really the reality of everybody who does indie. That's the lucky few. And that movie definitely helped them get there, right? So this is just a presentation on my road and how you guys can get started with indie. Thanks. So what do? I'm very much into doing things myself, being indie. I'm Astro Crow. There's no little Twitter thing. I don't really update that. My most popular game is called The Last Days of Space. I'm also in a band called Yogurt Smoothness. We've got 2 albums on Spotify, iTunes, blah, blah, blah. We've been on 3 tours. I also do chiptunes, composer, musician, blah, blah. I also have a website called JapaneseLingo.com that I just launched earlier this year. It's daily updates for Japanese lessons. Learning Japanese, I started back in high school and I speak it pretty well now. I've been doing it for like 13 years. All this stuff I taught myself how to play instruments, how to speak these languages, how to do game design. I'm just very into doing things on my own in the whole indie aesthetic. So I don't know, I love indie because it's, we'll see why. Next up. So let's talk about the game industry. Most of you guys want to get into the game industry after college. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I am an educator. I teach over at the other school down the other end of university, if you know what I'm talking about. It's very full, and there's a sale. I teach game design there as a full-time job. But game industry, generally, there's 2 routes you can go, right? Next slide. We got AAA or commercial. You guys all know that. If you've heard of them, most likely they're AAA. If you've heard of them and you still think they're indie, their publisher might be a AAA. So you can either go that route and just become a small part of a big team, or you can try and work for an indie. The thing about working for an indie is they tend to be very closed. You have to know somebody who knows somebody. Actually, it's probably better if you just know somebody directly to get into that. They don't always just hire, and if they do, it's normally because they heard about you from somewhere. So the Behemoth was the best I could come up with, like that would actually you'd see on like Gama Sutra posting jobs, or you can just go and start your own. Next one. So let's talk about working for EA or Blizzard, right? The pros: consistent paycheck. That's might be important to you, might not be, but that's definitely the pro of working for somebody else's company. They have a large budget, so a lot of times if you have an idea you want to pull off, they can find the funding for you. If you want to get a famous actor or a famous band to do your music, they have no problem allocating those resources to get them. The cons, of course, you've heard about the rigid structure. You do this one job and you cannot go outside of that box because they have somebody else to check to make sure that you're in that box. Stressful deadlines. It's an industry, right? You're in AAA, you're in the game industry, so if you miss your deadline, it causes this ripple effect where the advertisers can't do their promotion on time, the reviewers can't do the review on time, so you end up working a lot. Let's go to the next one. So out of everyone here, who actually wants to try and do an indie studio? It's actually really good numbers. Okay. What would be your reason for going indie? Just the freedom, right? Okay. Yeah, and if you guys don't know, a lot of AAAs have a non-compete clause, meaning while you're employed at the AAA, I don't know if anyone knows this, you actually cannot even run ideas by them. It becomes their property. So if you have a little pet project you're working on at home and you go to your boss and say, hey, I'm working on this cool thing where it's like Final Fantasy meets, what do you call it? Final Fantasy meets Space Invaders somehow, right? And they're like, okay, well now if you ever come out with that, they can actually have the right to sue you because you are wholly under their umbrella. They kind of own your ideas while you're on property. And the same goes if they even saw you working on one line of code at the office, it's now their property. So definitely, if you go indie, you're not your ideas aren't owned by somebody else. So next slide. So the pros, obviously, you are your own boss, freedom. Many a time I've coded in a bar outside till my battery ran out at a coffee house. But then the bad side is, at the end of the day, you are your own boss. So you have to make sure that you're actually going to be motivated enough to get stuff done. There is no money at the end of the day. You work at a AAA job, it's like you might not be into it, invested emotionally, but you go home and you're like, okay, I have some spending money, I can pay my rent. This, you're just like, I got another 2 months to go and there's no paycheck in sight. You also have to, the team earlier talked about wearing multiple hats. You go from being a cog in the machine to you actually are the machine. So if you're not aware how a certain program application works, let's say it's AI, let's say it's doing UI, you're gonna have to hire somebody, you have to find someone to do a favor maybe, or you're gonna have to learn to do it yourself. Let's talk about my indie story, how I got into indie. I used to work, I graduated from UCF, by the way, digital media, and shortly after I started working at IST, doing stuff I didn't want to do, and then I got transferred to the retro lab, which I don't know if they even still have the retro lab here, but I was doing serious games, and what serious games means when you have a government contractor means you make games and then they make it serious, so it's no longer fun. That's what always happened when we would make games. They'd be like, we like everything in there except for the part that's actually fun, so remove that and make your game like a slideshow. Which was very frustrating because we were the gaming department. So what happened is I wound up getting laid off for that job. That day, I called up my friend who graduated from, we actually was a teacher here, teaching art, and I was like, I've always wanted to do a game studio. He's really into games, I'm really into games, let's just do it. We come up that day with the idea called The Last Days of Space, and 6 months later, we finally released it. At Last Days of Space was on, what do we call it? Cocos 2D was the engine. Because this was like 4 or 5 years ago, before Unity was as known as it is now. Now I do everything in Unity because I just love Unity. Trying to think what else I could say about that game. Okay, so The Last Days of Space was a quick idea because this was before Jetpack Joyride, like before it was filled up with those infinite runners. There was like one other, which was Cannonball. Maybe you guys have heard of Cannonball. So we decided to make an infinite runner. There was like 2 or 3. So they're all pretty much just jump. The entire game is just jump. So with The Last Days of Space, we said, we're gonna make it, you can jump, you can slide, you can flick, you can poke. So it becomes like Simon, but in infinite runner form. And we had really cool cartoon graphics. Sean, my artist, was really good with the animation, which is hard to find in an artist that does also good sprites as well as animation. And I had a cool surf rock soundtrack. And if you guys check out that game, the cool thing about the surf rock soundtrack is we were thinking about what the idea should be for the music. And we're like, I put on a drum beat on like a crappy Casio. I was like, I grabbed my guitar and I was like, it should be something like this, and I was recording on my phone, and whatever came out was what's in the game now. So it took me 3 hours to learn what I just did, but it was all improv. And I was like, yeah, that'll work. And we actually recorded the song at Valencia, by the way, so it's all local. Okay, when you go the indie route, you can start your own company, or you can decide to find another indie to collaborate with. I'm saying collaborate, not work for, because a lot of them don't have budgets to actually hire you. So you're just going to be finding like-minded people, and hopefully at the end you're going to have a product that you can sell. So what myself, and I'm guessing other indies, are looking for, if you have worked on any finished shipped products of any kind, doesn't have to be a game, it has to just any form of advertising, a website, as long as it's finished, that's like worth its weight in gold to developers, because so many people don't realize how hard it is to get to the finish line when you dev games or just dev anything. It's a lot more work than people assume it is. So having actually a credit in the finished product is awesome. Your portfolio, a lot of people try and have a very diverse portfolio, but when you're doing indie, you can have a lot more of your own personal style. So we'd rather like to see what you do best. You guys know Tommy Tallarico at all? So he gave a speech over at Full Sail, and he put this awesome quote. He said, if I'm making a game and I need a reggae soundtrack, I'm going to hire a reggae band. I'm not going to get some guy who we have on the staff and be like, hey, try your shot at reggae music. We want people who know the material and they know how to do it well. So it's the same with indie. I like finding artists who already have their own style. I don't give them a style sheet. I don't give them already made character designs by another artist. I go, you're the artist. I'll tell you the idea for the game, and you just run with that. You get happier employees, well, not really employees, happier collaborators, and it also has its own style. So when you do your portfolio, show off, like I said, what you're good at, not how you can do all these different things. Self-motivation, obviously, eager dedication, up-to-date, deep knowledge of games. You have to know other mechanics, so if we're talking about a game in a meeting, and we're like, okay, it's going to be like this game and that game, and if you never played both of those games, you have to go and do it, and you can't just assume, like, fake your way through it. And that's also how you're going to be successful as an indie, because you don't want to make something that you don't want to reinvent the wheel. If you go, I'm going to make an MMO, it's going to be in a fantasy world, and it's got characters from Warcraft, right? But I mean, it's already done. But there's also no way that you would even be better than that, because you have a lot smaller budget, you've got a lot less capability. You don't want to make something where there's already big players that would just knock you out. So having knowledge of what's been done, what you can do, you find a little, like what we do, try and find a niche. So we say, like, for instance, there are tons of infinite runners. We're like, there's no infinite runner that gives you a huge challenge with a bunch of different things to do and has that level of graphical quality. So that's like our little niche. So if anyone looks that up, we're the only ones that exist right there. And of course, as when I teach, like, this is the biggest problem, and I don't know why, proper spelling and grammar. I get emails, people trying to apply to work with me, and they can't spell simple things. It looks bad. That's all I gotta say. Like, it doesn't really mean that you might not be talented or you have bad talent, but on first impressions, if you're already spelling like 3 words wrong in your email, and there are things that, you have spell check nowadays, it's already underlined, it's a chance that I'm going to think you're sloppy with your work. Keep in mind, gaming, software in general is all about, it's an exact science, right? You can't half-ass it and expect it to work. You're like, oh, I'll just leave off all the semicolons, I don't care. Or if, like, you're balancing a game, it's like, oh, he's supposed to jump 25 pixels, and you go, I'll just make him jump 30 pixels, I don't care. You've totally unbalanced the entire, I guess, you unbalance the balance. I don't want to say that, but that makes sense to me. So you have to be very detail-oriented, and when I see someone who's just making a bunch of spelling errors, I'm like, well, they're going to just, flub all the other numbers, and they're not going to give me exactly what I want. Or you can go your own route and just make your own studio from scratch. Just find a team. Typically, on average, you'll have 3 members. You've got the coder, you got the artist, and you got the audio guy. That's just the best way to divide things, so you have people that are just specialized. And obviously they bleed sometimes. I can do all of those. I prefer to do just the audio and the code myself. I like having a dedicated artist because you get better results and a better style. And when you're starting your own business, it'd be really cool to work with your friends, but you don't actually know if they're going to be good for it. That's a big problem that I've run into, people I know have run into. So even if you want to, trust that someone will do the job, test them out for a little bit, see how well they work, see how fast they response when they communicate with you. The holy grail is always, if you find someone who's not only talented but reliable, and then when we say reliable, it's also easy to get along with. It's very hard that you get both of those. I've had the worst work I've had was with artists. I have a lot of really, really creative, really, really talented artists, but it literally takes 3 months to get them to give me one asset, And so it's okay because I work on a bunch of projects at once, and the way my design is whoever's available, I'll work with them. But after a while, you get kind of graded. It gets kind of like it grates on you if you have to keep asking somebody for something. And the funny thing is too with the artists too, they're lightning fast, and they'll go from having nothing, and then finally the one day they sit down to do the work, they'll do the entire game and it'll look awesome in like 6 hours. but just coaxing them to do that. I found. Talk is cheap. Yes, talk is cheap. I don't believe anything anybody says nowadays when it comes to applying for jobs or what they're going to do. So many people are producers, so many people are artists, so many people are programmers, and then when you finally try and get them to do something, they either don't know what they're talking about or they disappear. That's very common. You'll have someone, I've had people who have called me up to meet with me, have a meeting, and then won't follow up with the meeting when we were already laying stuff in place, and they just disappear. And then like 2 months later, they'll try and add me on LinkedIn. And it's like, what do you want me to do? Like sponsor you for being irresponsible, you know? Don't, if you burn somebody, don't add them on LinkedIn. That's another tip. So always show something to, I guess if you're applying, if you want to work with an indie team, like we got to see what you're capable of and if you're going to actually do it. Right. Okay, you want to make a name for your studio, obviously, but you don't want it to be already taken. You don't want it to be confusing. You'd like to have a brand, so you want to make sure that you can have it on a bunch of different sites, right? So if you use namecheck.com, Namecheck, it's a really cool website. You type in whatever your name is, and it goes through like 100 of the most popular social media sites, and it shows you if it's available or not. Very useful. Our name, Astro Crow, was just, we named it that because it was one of the few names we come up with that wasn't already taken in some pathway. Also, it's funny because if you notice our name is adjective animal. That happens to be the trend for some reason with indie studios. There's like 1,000,001 indie studios that happen to have adjective animal name. The other team mentioned registering your business. Yes, you can do an LLC or a corporation. LLC tends to be more flexible. You can have international partners if you do an LLC. Sunbiz.org, yeah, as I mentioned. An operating agreement is the thing that gets it in writing and makes sure you know how you're going to run the company, how things are going to be divvied up, payments possibly. You could say in it how it's going to be contractual, like a per game basis. And just remember, you have to file that annual report annually. Okay. So let's make a game. You're making your first game. You don't want to make a WoW killer, right? It's a bad idea. Some studios have tried that, and they are bankrupt now. And 38 Studios, you guys heard of them? Anybody know 38 Studios? Yeah. There's like Kurt Schilling, the baseball player, doesn't know anything about the game industry, and was like, I'm going to go into the game industry, and I'm going to make the game to kill the highest grossing game of all time right now. I think it is. And obviously they failed, and he lost like his entire fortune, and he's being sued by a bunch of people. So you want to start really small. Also because it's most likely, I would suggest doing this in your spare time. I wouldn't right off the bat quit your job so you can go do indie and assume that you're going to get a bunch of money. We just heard Sean talk. He got very, very lucky with his game. Like he mentioned, I don't think he even mentioned on Greenlight, his game got greenlit in like 6 days. I worked for a company, the Gentleman Squid Company, who's local. Have you guys heard of them? Gentleman Squid, they're on IST, or Research Parkway. And they released a game on Steam Greenlight called 3 Dead Zed. I did some work on that, and it took them 18 months to get greenlit, which is really, really long. So you can't just be like, oh, like he mentioned, he's like, my game, I thought it would be the next Angry Birds, and it wasn't. So you don't want to be that cocky, I suppose. So I would suggest get a full-time job doing something, maybe working at something related to the game industry or something where you still get to do your talents. And then small scale meaning, one level or something, or a few levels that use very similar game mechanics. Possibly if it's a puzzle game, because you can just up the difficulty, and it's the same, coding-wise it's the same thing, you just move around a lot of numbers and values. And what you can do, if you want to get some sort of funding, you can try and do out of pocket, which is problematic because that's finite and it's your money on the line. You can get investors, which is, if you guys know what an angel investor is, it's somebody who will give you a greater amount of money for less return because they're passionate about what you do, or there's somebody who's been like you before, and they're like, oh, I want to help out another dev like you. I like what you guys are doing, so I won't give you as high of a interest rate. And then crowdsourcing. The biggest problem with crowdsourcing is a lot of people overpromise. They'll end up saying, oh, we're going to do this for all the people who do $50 donations, and then they get 20,000 people who did the $50 donation, and they have to make them all happy, or you're going to have a backlash. You mentioned, Sean mentioned Yogscast. You guys hear about their Kickstarter? Yeah, they raised, what was it, like 165,000? Oh yeah, they raised like $165,000, and they just got somebody who they didn't really know that well, who just said he could do the game, and it turned out he wasn't that capable of doing it, and it just fell apart, and it looked really, really bad on their half because all of their donators, or what do they call it, their backers, all their backers, they just had to let down and say, hey, we can't do this, sorry. It doesn't look too well, and it's very hard to come back from something like that. Okay, let's talk about platform. If you're making an indie game, you definitely want to do multi-platform engines. Unity, my favorite, seems to be everyone's favorite here. It's very, very flexible. It's good to do 2D and 3D. The only downside I would say with Unity is if you want the really good assets from the asset store, they cost a lot of money. If you try and get the cheaper ones, there's no really standards, so you get people, for instance, the one I'm using, it's a good asset bundle, but the guy who codes it, English isn't his first language, so a lot of his function names are like, what do you call it, the parameter names, they're all spelled wrong. It's very frustrating. Then you have UDK, which is obviously a lot more powerful, but it's a bit harder to learn. The new UDK is even weirder because they got rid of code and it's going to be all scripting, this like weird hybrid thing. Then GameMaker Studio. A couple guys I work with actually use GameMaker Studio. It's very a whole lot simpler. It's kind of like RPG Maker in a way when I messed around with it. But it's got a lot more limitations on it. But you can do like a simple puzzle game, simple 2D stuff. It does do 3D, but it doesn't look that great. Mobile is the easiest platform to deploy to. If you want to do iOS, it's $100 a year. If you want to do Google Play, it's $30 a year. In PC, you can go the routes of Steam, Greenlight, Visura, Indievania, but Steam, as I mentioned earlier, has a lot of tricky approval process. It can take forever. And then the strictest one is console and handheld, like PlayStation 4, DS, what is it, 3DSware. They are willing to work with indies, and in fact, Sony actually made it a point for the PS4 to make it a lot more indie friendly than it was. Pretty much the consoles switched. So 360 used to be the one that was friendly for indie, and then PlayStation 3 was really exclusive, and now the Xbox One is kind of hard to get onto, but PS4 is a lot easier. But they go through everything you do with a fine-tooth comb, and especially Nintendo. Nintendo is brutal. They will shut you down really quick. Everything has to be exactly as they like it. When you do make a game, some tips to keep you going, keep you motivated. Always check the forums, especially you're using one of those engines that a bunch of people have already experienced, like Unity. There has been somebody who has had your problem before, and a lot of times you can type it in a sentence and it'll be the first result. That's really handy. Beware the Pareto principle. Do you guys understand what that is? Have you ever heard that before? Have you ever heard the 80-20 rule? So the 80-20 rule is 80% of your project takes 20% of your time to do. So to get that last 20% is going to be the remaining 80%. And that's where a lot of game projects just like fall apart, because people go, you got this level, you got your game mechanics in, but then the final polish to actually make it a working, cohesive product that you can sell, that's not buggy, that passes all of the requirements or whatever it is. If you're doing mobile, that matches all of the platforms, because you got to test it on every device, right? You have all these different resolutions. And yes, you can use the emulators. Like in Unity, they have little emulators for the iPhone and for the Android. But if you want the actual system function calls, like calling up ads, doing Facebook integration, you have to have a physical device to even test it. So make sure you do that. But just getting there, it takes a lot longer than you think. And I remember my first game, I was like, oh, it's so easy. Like 3 months in, I was like, yeah, this is great. it's going to be out pretty soon. And then 6 months later, I'm still, or 3 months later, I'm still working on it. I'm like, finally, it's almost done. Okay. Big tip, do not update tools, software mid-development unless absolutely necessary. I just did that, and I just had that happen to me. I was about to push out a new update for my game Farty Pig, and one of my plugins had an update. I was like, oh, great, let's update it. Screwed up everything, and now I'm going to be going home tonight and just digging through that and seeing what I did wrong. Another thing is, by locking that down, you know what you're working with, and you know things can get changed. Back in the day when I was doing my first game, Last Ace of Space, on Xcode and Cocos 2D, they were relatively, well, the updates were coming really, really fast. So it was like I was using OpenFaint, Cocos 2D, and Xcode, and they would trade off. Like 1 month you'd have to update this one, the next month, or not even month, like 2 weeks you update this one, then you have to update this one, then you have to update this one, but they all would have changes. They wouldn't just deprecate the code. You'd have to replace all of the functions and type them up from scratch. Can you go back? Yeah. So the worst one I had, and this was with that OpenFaint tool, was they just did a new update, and I'm like, okay, I'll throw that in right before I commit my latest build to the store, and it didn't work. I followed their instructions exactly, didn't work, and I'm like, what did I do wrong? I rebuild my project, I'm rebuilding everything from scratch, pulling out like chunks of code, putting it back in. Doesn't work for 3 days, and I'm like, I can't launch my game, I can't push out my new update because it's not working. Then on the third day, they send out an email saying, oh, oops, our instructions were wrong. So that's another reason why, don't adopt the latest and greatest. Like, stick with what you have. Okay, when you're working on a team, you got to stay organized. Google Docs are awesome. Everyone can look at that, everyone can share it. Keep the communication flowing. If you guys don't work together, like, you can do remote. I work remote with a lot of my people whenever I do projects, because as the only coder and as the only artist and the only music guy, there's not much that we have to collaborate on. They just have to see things, and you can show them, you can send them builds. What I do is with Unity, I'll push out a PC version of like my mobile game build and just like put a box around it so it looks like the same dimensions, and they can play it on their computer. Okay. Please back up and commit frequently. I have a extra hard drive with me at all times. I have a hard drive at my own house, and I have a hard drive at a friend's house just in case anything ever goes down. And when I can, I try and back up like at least once a month is what I should be doing, and sometimes I slack on that. Do you guys know the company that made, what is it, Ridiculous Fishing? Yeah, Lambier, so Lambier, right? So not only they had a really bad year, not only did someone steal, this was like 2-3 years ago, someone stole their game, like Mechanic for Mechanic, and called it Ninja Fishing and put it on the store as they were developing Ridiculous Fishing for mobile. So it kind of like killed the steam of their game that was about to be released. They went to E3, they went to a party, and they brought their laptop with them, and it got stolen. And that was their only copy of all of their code base. So not the best idea. Try and back things up. Having knowledge of how each role fits into the development process will really help you. If you have an artist who has no idea how the art goes into the game, they're probably going to give you things in weird sizes. They have to know the right resolution. They have to know what format. Then it ends up being work on your end if the artist isn't aware of how everything fits. If your musician is making sound effects and music and he doesn't get to see early versions of the game, he doesn't have the right feel for it. He might not know how long things are supposed to last sound-wise. Playtest, playtest, playtest. Always get a wide variety of people to play your game. If that's your friends, try and get your friends to be honest with you. A lot of times they'll just tell you it's great, but you want them to be very critical and very brutal, because a lot of times that's where you find out what you're doing wrong and what you're doing right. And you want to make sure that it's actually the people you're looking for your demographic. If you get all your friends who play MOBAs, and then you're making some little casual game for let's say 10-year-olds, they're not the best people to get feedback from. You can monitor playthroughs. People actually use video cameras to capture how people play through. I mean, you can do it yourself as well. And surveys at the end of it, you ask them a couple questions and see how they respond. And then I mentioned this earlier with mobile, get as many devices as you can find, because there's so much fragmentation. You're going to find the one device that doesn't work, and that's going to be the guy who leaves a bad review. Okay. All right, so you did all that. You finally make a game. You're still not done. And this is more if you're doing mobile, right? So you have to do your press releases, which you can find templates online how to do that. You send out promo codes. On Android, though, there is no promo codes. It's just you send them the actual APK, which is kind of dangerous because they could just send it out to everybody and then it'd be up on torrent, and then everyone can just install it. So what you want to do is, at least what I do, is I put a little, for my review copies, I make it time sensitive. So I say if I'm handing it out, like let's say this week or whatever, I'll give it a 3-day or 7-day expiration period. And so that way the only way they could play my game again if they set their clock to that date again, but it's too much work, right? For most people, if they have to constantly go back and change their clock to play my game, it's not worth it. There's other ways you could do that too, but that was the quickest one that I've done lately. Copy. Copy actually is a word that's really confusing nowadays, but copy is all the promotional text that you do, like the app description, similar to the press release. And then your keywords is really important because that's how it gets found in the search algorithms. So you want to use keywords. If you can swing it to keywords that would be of like a popular game, so if like you have a character that gets angry and there's a bird, you might be able to put angry and birds. Apple has been known to actually remove keywords if they don't actually show up in your game. So try and find a way to make relative keywords. Promo materials, you got screenshots, you got trailers. It's relatively easy to do nowadays. You just, on your computer, video software. So you also want to think about your pricing structure, and this is like make or break whether you're going to actually make a profit when you do this. The most typical ones on mobile, you have the flat price, so just 99 cents, you get the game, that's it, you get to play the full experience. There's also free to download, so it costs nothing to get the game on your device, but when you play it, it's restricted, and then you can pay a little bit of money to get the full version unlocked. You've got free with ads, and it's got the banner ad, the interstitial, which is the full screen that pops up, and then there's an option to pay to remove those ads. Then you have free to pay, which is a little controversial because it ends up with people purposely scaling back their gameplay and making it kind of deceptive to kind of squeeze more money out of it. What I like to do, I actually do a hybrid of number 2. So it's free to download with trial, but it also has ads. So if they don't buy the game, at least I'm still making a little bit of revenue. Okay. You want to do a lot of PR, you want to do like a lot of social stuff, but be careful. Twitter, very dangerous tool to have, especially as an indie. You are now the face, you're the figurehead of your company. And if you have your account, first and last name mentions your company, you do anything that's controversial, you're going to have the internet hate machine all over you. You guys know Phil Fish, right? You know how everyone hates Phil Fish now, right? I know a couple people who have been fired from AAA jobs because they just made one comment, and sometimes it was just a joke in response to another thread, but because if you didn't know the context of it, if you just saw that one tweet, it looked really rude. And rather the AAA companies, at least, rather than have to explain themselves and go through this whole media zoo, they just drop you because it's easier on them. It makes them look better. People are mean on the internet. You have to know that. So every time you talk through a social media or anything that's tied to either your first and last name or your company, you are now speaking on behalf of your company. So be very PR friendly. If you have an opinion, keep it to yourself sometimes, if it's controversial. You got YouTube and Twitch Let's Plays and reviews. Those are good. Twitch is good because it has a lot more of an organic feel. YouTube is kind of crawling into this pay to Let's Play. If you've heard about that, a lot of companies are now offering incentives to people to play their games on their Let's Plays. And sometimes they actually say you can't say anything bad about our game. It has to only be positive stuff, which is really blurring the line. A lot of people are starting to rebel against that. You've got conventions, you've got local events. I've been to E3 the last 6 years in a row. Never had a booth, but when you wait in line, you're always with a bunch of people who are very bored. You pull out your device and you say, would you like to play my game? Blah, blah, blah. You give the little spiel. You see what they say about it. Local events, I'll talk about that later. And then, of course, your cheapskate friends and family. There's always somebody who has to have a reason why they can't download your game. You know, I have friends who haven't even downloaded some of my free games, and it's just too much of a hassle for them. I don't know what the reason is. But if you can get it on their device however possible, if you get to hold their phone for a second, just put your free game on there, you know, up the rating and the review. Not to say it's a big deal if it's an honest rating or review, but those are how you move up in the rankings. Ratings and reviews and downloads. Those are the only three criteria they look at. And a lot of it has to do with how fast you have it in a small period of time. So you really want to do like a blitz as soon as you launch a game. Everybody I know, just download the game, leave a 5-star rating and review, because you're not really fighting whether you're making a good game or not nowadays, because they're dirt cheap. You're probably making the game free. You're making it 99 cents. If it's like a 7 out of 10, if it's like a 6 out of 10, it doesn't matter, because you have to compete. Even if you make a 9 out of 10 game, you have to compete with probably, let's say, 5,000 other games that are coming out in the next 6 months, right? And people have to know that it exists. So by raising your visibility, at least people get to know it exists, and then they can judge whether they think it's a good game or bad game. But if your friends and family don't help out and it doesn't go up the ranks, it won't get seen. You know, kind of go unnoticed. Okay. I kind of mentioned that with the Twitter thing. Somebody will hate your game. There's always somebody who's very vocal and very not nice about it. I made one of my games free once and posted it in a forum like, hey, you guys can check out my free game, and you won't believe I guess the shitstorm that I got. Just everyone's like, this is the worst game I've ever seen. I hate this game. It's free, you know, like there's no obligation, there's no onus on you to actually download it. You can just walk away. But they feel the need to say like, well, as a gamer, I don't like this. And you have to learn, you know, you just got to keep quiet, try and educate, or just ignore it. Like by educate, I say like, for instance, one of my games is actually made for children, Trick or Treat Training. It's meant for parents to play with their kids. So what happens is at the beginning of the game, it's very easy. And then as you play the game, it gets kind of hard. So it provides something for children, it provides something for the adult at the same time. And you get people who just assume that it's a game for like the hardcore gaming crowd, and they're like, oh, this is too easy, this is stupid. And you know, so I'm like, well, the game is for a child, you are not a child. Sorry. It's equivalent. We have a problem now in media. This is slightly off topic, but it relates. Where people assume all media is for them, right? You rent a movie or whatever off Netflix. Well, you don't rent a movie, you watch it. What am I talking about? You watch a movie on Netflix, you listen to a song, and like you feel if it's not for you, it's a problem. Not that you shouldn't engage in it. You're like, I'm really upset that this isn't for me. But it's the equivalent of like watching Dora the Explorer and saying, oh, they're pandering to me. Like, of course, I took, you know, elementary Spanish. I know all this. There's actually websites where there's adults reviewing children's cartoons, and some of them are really harsh about this cartoon that's made for like a 5-year-old, and it's using simple English on purpose, you know. So just remember who it's for. Consider the source that's the difference. Consider the source is for the criticism, right? So if you get critiques by somebody, who are they? Are they just some like troll in the basement, right? Do they have any like impact on you? If a guy who I respected in the game industry gave me some criticism, then I would take that to heart. But if somebody I don't know is just saying, your game sucks, it's similar to music. Like in a band, you get a lot of that too. People have a lot of knee-jerk reactions to something. They either love it or they hate it. But regardless of what they say, I think of who are they, what are they saying that can actually like benefit me. So don't let it get you down. And don't quit your day job. So I actually missed the part when I talked about my game, what was actually happening when I launched my first game. As I mentioned, I lost my job, so I wasn't working anywhere else. I was doing that full time. I launched an album with my band. We decided to go on tour right when The Last Ace of Space was launched. So what we were going to do is I'm in the van sending out press releases, and then at night playing shows. Well, what happened was we got a lot of good exposure for the game, got a lot of good reviews, but just the sales weren't there to make it a viable business. And you know, I'm still doing it on the side, but I just could not do that full time, and I wound up losing a lot of money. And unfortunately, there's a lot of parallels between the indie music industry and the indie game industry, where you have a lot of people who like products, but they don't feel the need to purchase them, and they don't realize that the only way to keep these machines going is for you to keep put some sort of revenue stream into it. Okay. So let's look a little bit at what the current situation is for the mobile market. So if you look at this chart, what it's saying is 2% of developers are in the top tier. Actually, what happens is they just released an article that said 4 companies on mobile make 50% of all the revenue for the entire app store. One of them is King, one of them is Zynga, and I don't remember the other 2. And if you look, 88% are on the lower tier, and they have something called a poverty line. So if you see at the top that red, so on where the poverty line is, it means your app is making less than $500 a month per app. And that's split between your entire team, right? So a lot of them are minimum, on average 3 people. So you end up with, very similar to music, you have the people who are like in the top 40, top 40 hits, whatever, they're making all the money. Then all the indie bands are making nothing, and there's not really a middle class. Similar to like the American economy at the moment, right? And by the way, there's a website you can look at where it has the estimated money that all of these apps are making. Candy Crush and Clash of Clans are making like $1.6 million a day. Okay, and then think about if that is like 50% of the market. Think about what the smaller people are making. Right? So I did a little math for you guys, so you can see how hard it is to be a 99-cent or free product company. Now, if you do stuff on Steam, obviously you have a much higher price point. You can sell games for like $10 to $15. But if you're doing mobile, if you do anything above $1.99, people look at you like you're insane. Even 99 cents nowadays, people are like, you should just make it free. It's like, well, let me tell you how I pay my bill. So imagine this. 99 cents is your game. Apple takes 30%. So 69 cents. You got your 3 people. You got 23 per person per sale of your game. Average rent, let's just say it's $500 a person and $100 utilities in around here, right? So $600 a person a month. Dunbar's number states that you can only have 150 meaningful relationships with people, like on your Facebook or whatever, before you forget who they are. And you're like, why is this person in my friends list? So if you get all 150 of your friends to tell 2 of their friends, it's 450. And if they tell 2 more, you now have 1,050 people buying your game. And after your cut, you get $241.50. So it's almost half of your rent. And this is for one person. And what are the odds that all of your friends are going to actually buy your game? Like I mentioned, I have friends who I've known them forever, really good friends. I look on their phone, I'm like, you don't have my game. And he's like, I'll get it eventually. I'm like, no, you're buying it now. Right. So it's really, really tough in the mobile market. You really have to just go big or you just won't survive. Okay. So if you want to talk about the ad revenue on free games, what happens actually, which is kind of, it's interesting, but it's also kind of bad. It's good and bad. How about that? So the ads, the more popular your game is, the more advertisers try and vie for spots in that game. So you end up making more money when you're more popular. So when you're not popular, you make roughly 11 cents a click. Sometimes there will be an ad for like an app. If you click on that and it takes you to the App Store and you download that app and then you run it once, you make a little bit more. Sometimes you can make up to $1. But when you're not big and when you're a struggling indie, that's like the level you make. However, like Flappy Bird and stuff, Flappy Bird is probably making like $1 to $2 per click because it was a visible game, and all the advertisers were paying more to get their game or get their ads into the game. Okay, and so remember, if you want to support indies that have free games, the money doesn't come out of thin air. Just click on the ad, even if you aren't going to pay attention. It'll get them 6 cents or 11 cents. Okay. Yeah, I got 6 cents the other day when someone clicked on it. We tested it. Okay, in the market now, for some reason, we have this image that 99 cents is a ludicrous price for something that 3 people who have college degrees work 6 months on, right? So think about what costs more than 99 cents. Wendy's is like super expensive now. I can spend like $12 at Wendy's somehow. A beer at a bar is $3.50 plus tip. Average movie ticket, $10. You think about if there's 90 minutes of runtime, that means one app should be 9 minutes of entertainment. If you bought an app and it only gave you 9 minutes of entertainment, would you write a good rating on it? Would you say this is a great app? Totally worth my time in comparison to a movie that I just watched, which is passive, not even active. You don't think about it that way, right? You go, well, it only had 20 levels in it. I have a game like the Trick or Treat game that's for kids, and it's throwing candy. That the whole mechanic of the game is you throw the right candy at the right time, and someone wrote all you do is throw candy. Yes, yes, of course. That's what the point is. So even if you think about a beer, right? So you're tipping. You tip $1 minimum, right? You don't tip change, I guess, when you're at a bar. You're tipping $1 for somebody to literally do this. But when you have people who sat there and they're working, they like highly what do you call it? Refined arts. Like they've been doing art their whole life. They've been making music their whole life. They're learning code and you know it's very math heavy and physics heavy. And they worked on this forever for free, so they could bring it to you, and you hesitate. You're like, oh, I don't know if that's worth it. This guy just went like that. I've got to pay him $1, but you know, this is something I really got to sit and think about. Right. So one of those reasons that we feel that way is because we have what's called the race to the bottom, where you have these AAAs. Now that the AAAs have flooded the mobile market, they'll make a game that's probably like, you know, if it was on console, they'll charge like $10 worth of content. So remember, Angry Birds is on the Wii for $30, right? You can buy the 99-cent, or it's free on a lot of devices now, the same exact game, but it's on a up-res screen and uses a different controller. It's $30. So because they know that there's such a high, such a large user base, it's like over 100 million, even more because China now has access to iPhones. They know that they can make their games really cheap and they'll still make a huge profit because it's the visibility, right? So consumer expectations have been set so high now that when you put out something that's dirt cheap, they look at it and they go, well, I could get Angry Birds for the same price. And clearly it's more fun, it's more entertaining. You guys have probably heard the phrase entitlement generation. I teach, it's definitely a thing. You have people who don't want to try and don't put effort and still think that they deserve the A. I should give them what they want because their parents do it. You have a lot of people who will take ownership in what isn't theirs. So gaming has turned into a little bit of like a media circus, kind of like a TMZ, thanks to Kotaku and stuff like that. So you have these people who focus on the individuals who make these games and say things like, oh, well, if their game supports Origin, I'm just going to pirate it, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, just don't play it. It's like, well, I have to play it. I can't not play it. But it's like, this is my thing. And, you know, like Call of Duty, people get, there's like the lead designer for Call of Duty was getting like death threats because they nerfed one of the guns. And it's like, just don't play it. So say it sucks. Like, you know, this is my life, and now you ruined my life because the gun isn't as good. It's like, it's not yours. Like, just, you know, it's entertainment. Like, you're meant to enjoy it. Just if you don't like it, there's other things you can do. There's also no grasp of designer's intent. Like I mentioned, it's very hard to distinguish yourself between what's pointed at hardcore audiences, what's pointed for children. There are a little bit of tags you can do. Like you can tag a game as like all ages, but still people will still gravitate towards it and say, oh, this is a game for me, I'm going to play it. Oh, I don't like it. And then they especially don't notice price anymore. How many people, you got something on a Steam sale and you got it for like, you know, $1 or like maybe $2 or something like that. And you don't think like, well, this is great because this would have originally cost me $30. That never crosses your mind. You're just like, this is a cool game or this is a bad game. You got to think like how much money they were trying to sell it for. So if a game, you're playing it, you're like, this isn't that engrossing. You're like, well, full price it was $3, right? I always use Skyrim because people compare games to Skyrim. So if someone made like an RPG and you're like, this game's nothing like Skyrim. Skyrim's so much better. It's like, well, Skyrim's charged 8 times the price of the same game. You don't look at it as like a value comparison. You just look at them as a piece of material, not a material. What I'm trying to say, like a game. It's like this is a game. This is a game. Not this is a $60 game and this is a $5 game. Because price, once you've bought it, you tend to be blind to it. It's a weird phenomenon. So often you have people who are unable to tell, looking at a game in the App Store, it doesn't really scream, this is an indie, this is made by a AAA. You just look at it and you're like, well, this game looks better, this game looks worse. When really, if there were more signs that you could tell it was indie, you'd be more forgiving, maybe. Some people don't want to look that deep anyway, though. Okay. So how many people like indie games and are sick of mainstream games. Like you look at Candy Crush, you look at even what EA does, right? And you're kind of upset about that. Is there anybody who likes what they do there? Kind of. So if you like indie games, where do you think their money comes from? From you, right? From what? Tooth Fairy? Because they can't afford toothpaste and then their teeth fall out, right? That comes from you, the fans. So if you actually like indie games, how many people have bought an indie game in the last month? That's awesome. How many people have bought a soda in the last week? How many people bought an indie game in the last week? This is like an exception, an exceptionally high number. The number I like to get around is like, you should spend, and this isn't saying you have to buy games you don't like. This isn't saying buy things that you don't approve of, blah, 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 blah. But I'm saying if you honestly like indie games, the amount of money you spend on soda a year should be equivalent to how much you spend on indie games. Because there's people out there who you like. What really hurts indie businesses is if the fans who like it don't support it. I'm not for people saying, oh, we should trick everybody and do these deceptive practices and make the game look like it's something it's not, so then once you buy it, you've already given me the money and then I can run. But if you like something and you're like, oh, I really like this game, and then you turn around, that's not helping those people make the content that you enjoy. That's going to make them go work for the AAA company, and then there's going to be less indie games. So really, fans of indie games need to support, or just any indie entertainment, movies, music. You have to buy it occasionally. And like I said, don't buy bad things. If someone just makes a bunch of like rip-off clones and it's terrible graphics, you don't feel like you're guilt-tripped into buying it. But if you like something, you're like, oh, that's really cool. Oh, and it's dirt cheap. Yeah, I'll buy it definitely. I got an achievement for like 100 games on my Steam, and I've opened like 2 in the past month, I think, because I'm just like, oh yeah, it's indie, it's cool, that's fine. And then so, your dollar is your vote with anything. If you don't like what EA is doing, don't buy games from EA. If you don't like, there's people out there who are like that, who are like, oh, this new Marvel movie is gonna suck, but I'm gonna go see it. Like, okay, well that's not helping because they just see dollar signs. They don't see your opinion. They don't really care. They just care about the dollar sign, actually. So think about, there's a lot of worse ways that you could spend your dollar. And then if indies do have free games, just remember that they're trying to make a living off of the ads. So you might want to just pay attention to the ads. Don't be like one of those people who brag that you have ad block on when you're engaging in indie entertainment. Oh yeah, I don't have to see the ads. Like, well, what would happen if they discontinued support for your game? It'd be like, oh, I'd write them a death threat, right? It's like, well, where do you think? It's all an economy, right? So we have to help keeping our indie economy going. If you're somebody who maybe can't afford it, you can always help out with your voice. Someone put it to me that console releases, you have a month in the sun, right? So it was Destiny. When Destiny came out, that was like the game to check out. Indie games have a week. So all you have to do is get that 1 week, and then you're set for that launch, whatever. You made back all your money, maybe you made a profit, and you can move on to the next app to design. And so the way you do that is like you have people help out and just spread the word. Like things pop up in like Facebook, it's like trending, blah, blah, blah. You'll see that link, you'll click on it, you'll see it for like a minute, you learned about it, and you engaged, and maybe you watch that little video, and then you move on. Apps should kind of be like that, and people should think about it more that way, where it's just a disposable medium. So you haven't yet to check out this game, you see your friend makes a link for it, you click on it, you play it for like 15 minutes, and you move on. At least it would be nice if it was considered that way. And by people just spreading the word, that's how you get it viral, and then everyone just sees it, and then they go away. So we're not trying to say that like indie mobile games should be like, everyone is their favorite game of all time and they play it all the time. It's just like you want it to spread out, people enjoy it for however many hours, maybe days if you're lucky, and then just disappears and you move on to the next. All right. If you want to get involved locally, have you guys heard of IndieNomicon? IndieNomicon's awesome. They do monthly events. You can meet up with local devs. It's a great place to network. And there's game jams. UCF does game jams, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Full Sail does them like we're doing them like once a month now. It's crazy. So I highly recommend going to Indienomicon. Thanks, guys. If you guys want to contact me, Brian at astrocrow.com. Cool.